Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to our Wednesday webinars. Before we begin today's webinar, we'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge the sad death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Her unstinting commitment to public service will not be forgotten, and our thoughts and sympathies are with the entire royal family at this time. I've personally been involved in planning for this sad event for many years, but on hearing the announcement on Thursday evening, it was a real milestone in our lives, and I had to take a few minutes just to pause and to recognise on that. And I'm sure many colleagues will be missing the live webinar today because of the duties to help with the operations to support the response to the death of our Queen. So today we're going to be talking about guest access and external access, and some of you will have been on our workshops or seen our previous webinars where we've been talking about these important aspects of Microsoft 365 and how they help everything work. What we're going to cover in today's webinar, and it's more of a conversation than showing you technology, is all supported by the common blueprint across all 43 forces. We all like the 365 element of all the tools we get, but that is supported by the identity access management, the approach that we enabled, and of course the National Management Centre are looking after our cloud infrastructure and the security of it. But today is about collaboration, and in many ways what we're doing is actually reducing the cyber risk or managing the cyber risk differently by using the new modern tools, but actually improving the way that we are able to collaborate. So I'm going to go over to Gemma first of all from Merseyside, and could you explain a little bit of how colleagues in the Northwest have been using guest access within MS Teams and how it's helping you work across those forces?
Yes, of course. Thank you, David. So within Merseyside, we set up our Teams request process some months ago now, and as part of that, we included guest access. And since then, we've had about 25 teams set up that have included guests from mainly other police forces, but other organisations too. The main benefit that these teams have seen is really around that easy sharing of data and being able to collect that data. Also working on documents simultaneously and being able to communicate within that team instantly with the members of that team. One area that I think's really seen the benefit is our niche programme. So within the Northwest, we've got Cheshire, Merseyside, North Wales and Dyfed-Powys on the same niche platform. So using something like Microsoft Teams to collaborate has seen some real benefits, and that's what we'll mainly be discussing today.
So how did you share documents and exchange data before you started using the platform in the way it is now set up?
So I think mainly people were doing the old emailing documents, massive attachments, finding other ways of sharing documents if they were of a certain size. So that was always, over the years, that's always been a major issue, and attachments too big to share, so trying to find other means. And obviously there'd be multiple copies then across wherever you're sharing that document to. So you would have multiple emails to and fro in, you would have documents saved locally, you wouldn't have any control over those documents, and there wouldn't be one version of the truth.
So what sort of problems does that cause? Does it actually impact on the daily delivery of the work that you were doing?
Yeah, so I think really what people have fed back is that it would be siloed working, there'd be a siloed approach, there would be delays in updating documents, there would be delays on getting answers to things. It would just make it a very inefficient and very clunky process, whereas obviously doing it in the new way has allowed a lot of efficiencies to be made in that process.
And one of the key ways of that, and you mentioned it before, was editing the documents at the same time, what we actually call co-authoring. But that can be quite confusing for people when they first see it and wonder, am I editing the same version? Who's keeping up to track with it? So what does co-authoring actually mean, and how hard is it to track the changes or to roll things back?
So it's really easy. There's an audit trail of what's going on in that document. You can manage that, and you can see what's been changed, who's changed it. You can see actually who's in the document when you're using that document as well. So so it just makes it really easy. You can look at the version history and you can roll back. So if you realise you need to go back to a previous version, you simply go into the version history and go back to the document that you want to do.
So we're working on a shared document today to help us do this, but I'm going to come over to Cheryl. So is it easier to get people to contribute when you're doing co-authoring and sharing these sort of documents?
Yeah, I think so. I think we've been a SharePoint house for a while, but certainly when we first started West Coast, it was really complex without the guest access. So we would have to create separate accounts for every person in Cheshire or North Wales we were working with. Difford would have been the same. Now that we've got guest access through 365, that is a lot easier. They don't have to connect to us first, then jump across to another server, jump across to another server, and then finally access. They can basically just swap organisations, go straight in and get to the content they want. Just on the co-author, and one thing I would like to mention is we do a lot of sharing through that site library that we have. So it's a full team. They can do their meetings in there. We've got a big SharePoint site behind it. One of the things that's most useful for us is running things like upgrades and failovers. So we basically switch on the co-authoring, and everyone who's on the Teams call can then follow where we are in that plan as we're doing it. So for instance, Jane, if she needs to switch a service off for Cheshire, we can say we're on this step of the plan. She can see exactly where we are. She can go into the plan and say, I've done that bit, and turn that bit on or off. And again, if you're coming into something like a failover quite late, you can just pick that document up. You're not on an email, you're not wondering where we are, you're looking at the plan live as it's updated, so you know exactly where we are in any upgrade or any failover. That's been really useful for us.
So this is about creating one version of the truth that you all share at the same time. And obviously there's a cost saving there as well, instead of creating extra licenses as well. But in terms of that, what sort of benefit is that actually seen? Has it changed the way you collaborate?
Yeah, I think it's made it a bit more seamless for us. Obviously lots of the forces, because we are essentially a big extended niche team now, rather than thinking of it as we're a service provider in Cheshire and North Wales and Difford all contact us. We see it as a big open platform. You can effectively go and self-serve. So Jane doesn't need to pick up the phone and say, hey Cheryl, where's this? Can I have it? You can just use your guest access, go on and get it yourself if you want. So, you know, that's quite handy if you're taking documents down from niche. You only want one source of those. You don't want to have them sat in 4 different forces on different versions, doing different things, getting updated by different people. It's much easier for us in that respect.
And Jane, would you be able to explain what it's like to start using this? What do staff think when they start using this sort of tool? Does it make a lot of difference to them?
It does indeed. Prior to this, I had to have a Merseyside account. I had to log into Merseyside via Citrix, and then navigate my way to where things are. Now I don't. I just go onto the SharePoint site, and everything I want is there. Everything I need is there. It has made life much easier.
So today we're talking very much about the back office in the group we've got. And if you've got any questions for the colleagues from the forces that are on, we've got David Powys, Cheshire, Merseyside on the line who have experienced this and can, you know, the reason they're here is they've told us all about the benefits they're achieving because of these tools. But it's not just the back office, the front line are beginning to benefit from this as well. But perhaps that's where we start working with partners. So Catherine, what are your plans in terms of bringing in colleagues from outside of policing to become guests in your tenant?
Good afternoon everyone. At David Powys, we're not a niche force at the moment, and as Cheryl and Jem have mentioned, we're sort of very early at the point of transition across into niche and working with West Coast Collaboration, but as well working with partners outside of policing, in particular local authorities. We don't have a match, so we don't have one single location for local authority, social workers, schools, etc. when working with areas of vulnerability. So being able to share that information across teams potentially going forward, it is a huge saving for us. There's a huge overhead at the moment in sharing that information via email or other sharing platforms. And again, going back to that single source of truth, so there's one document, one set of actions, one clear understanding of what is required is going to be a massive benefit for us going forward, especially as we cover a big geographical area, so it's really difficult to get everyone into one single location on a weekly or a daily basis for meetings.
And we have covered a few webinars where Forces have set up guest access to bring partners in, and it could be small little teams around that, or it could be quite larger and strategic work. But Gemma, obviously, one of the concerns about that, and apologies for everybody, I couldn't bring Catherine's camera up online for some reason then. We did have a little technical problem there. But Gemma, what sort of advice have you got for Forces in terms of approaching this from a security point of view or an information management point of view? There's obviously quite a lot of concerns about allowing people into our secure tenants. How can you reassure colleagues around that?
Yeah, so the approach that Merseyside took with all aspects of Teams really was a bit more of a start small and work up. So obviously by design, with the blueprints, it is secure by design, but we started with our Teams process just starting small with a number of guest access, so that we could, with a number of teams with guest access. So from that, we can review as we go along, and we have done. So over the last 6 months, we've looked at the process, and I work very closely with the information security team to understand that when we're bringing partners in that aren't police forces necessarily, and are other agencies or other organisations, what do we need to do to ensure the information is secure? So where we've not shared information with them before, what agreements do we need to put in place? Or is there any existing agreements that we just need to update? So it's about really working closely with the technical team and your information security.
That's fantastic. And we're beginning to get a few questions in, and I will come to them in a second. But I think one of the biggest changes that I found when I suddenly discovered this technology about 5 years ago and started using it was it does take a change in behaviour of the user. It's not about sharing an attached document anymore. You have to share a link to a document to make sure people have got access to it. But that doesn't necessarily mean you need to use Outlook. Gemma, could you just explain a little bit about the control that we maintain?
Yes, of course. So, I mean, it's definitely more secure, because if you send an email with an attachment on, you don't have any control over what happens and how that's managed locally. If you're sharing a document directly or sharing a link to a document, you've got full control over who has access. You can take that access away at any point as well, if they no longer need that access. But also what's really good is you can control the different permissions. So you could give someone full access to edit that document, or you could just give them read only. But what is a really good feature as well is you can block the download. So if you're sharing that with someone and you don't want that to go any further, you can put that setting in place, which is a really, really good setting. Obviously, you can audit it as well, as we've discussed about how you can see what's going on in that document. So you've got a full audit trail. You do need to put a management process into place. So owners do need to know that they're responsible for those guests and who has access to what. In Merseyside, we have a review process for all guest accounts. So it does, after so many days, I think it's 180 days, will get reviewed, and any sort of stale accounts will get deleted, and that access would have to be requested again. But actually, on a sort of day-to-day level, the owners are responsible for managing that access, and it's really, really easy to do.
So we've been talking about guest access for the last 15 minutes or so, but that's not the only part of it. And I'm going to come over to Cheryl in a second. There is something called, what we used to call federation, but now called external access, which I think is confusing with guest access because they do sound very similar. But what is perhaps external access, and how could that perhaps play a part in this?
So I think what we used to call federation, I think that name will probably linger on a little bit for anyone who's used to it. I tend to think of federation, it isn't something I work on regularly, but think of it as an extension of your local force address book. So for instance, if I wanted to know if Jane was sat at a desk because I've got a burning question, previously I'd just pick up the phone and hope. Now I can see with that federated access, yes, she's available, we can collaborate and we can talk on that basis. It doesn't give you the same file sharing roles that guest access does. So if you think about external access federation being that extension of your address book, I can see who's working where, but guest access is about your files. We also host some regional units, and I think that kind of access is quite handy for them because it means they don't lose that contact with their own force. So even if you're based in a regional unit and you see your same colleagues, you've still got colleagues at GMP or Lancashire or wherever you happen to work, you can pick up the phone, see if they're available if you need a chat.
A lot of the work we do across PDS with forces is because of our federation or our external access links. We are open to link with every force, so every minute we're encouraging more and more forces to link with all the other forces and partners, etc. There's a real benefit here on the operational side, so thinking about cross-border working or potentially ways that colleagues in neighbouring control rooms could work together. If we start to federate or external access with our partners, potentially the fire service control rooms, we could be using Teams to chat with each other when we're coordinating responses to incidents. There's a lot we could do. Cheryl, what more would you talk about on those points?
Yeah, I think it's sort of only really limited by your imagination. I think the benefits of this is that, like Gemma says, nothing leaves your organisation if you don't want it to leave your organisation, and you have a level of control you kind of don't have really. Once it goes out through an email, it's gone. Somebody else has got it on their server. They can forward it on. They can do whatever they like to it. It's really about you thinking about what you want as a force, but I think you shouldn't be scared of going through guest access or allowing people access, because ultimately nothing leaves your tenant if you don't want it to. You've got an audit trail, you've got versioning to roll back if you want to, you can set data loss prevention policies, and you can really work with your data protection specialists to get whatever you want out of that system.
I'm open to all of them, but if I start with Gemma, what sort of barriers have you faced in terms of turning on guest access or federation over the last few months and years as you've started to develop it?
I mean, because as I said earlier, we started small. So in my role, because I work around the Microsoft 365 adoption, so I work very closely with the technical team once they'd rolled out, and I work very closely with information security and data protection. So it was really just getting over those barriers of understanding that information security aspect, but because we had that collaborative approach anyway, we took it step by step. So it didn't come in the early days, didn't come across too many barriers really, because we worked as a team to kind of address what we needed, and we haven't gone big bang with it either. We've dipped our toe in and gradually evolved the process, which I think has helped. So it's not, you know, brought anything up that has been a showstopper.
That's excellent. I'm going to jump to some questions that are in the chat and say, please keep your questions coming in. We've still got just under 10 minutes left on the webinar today. So Kelly's asking, on the rollback, can this be done by anyone or just the last person who edited documents? This is about version control. Who wants to pick up on that one? Cheryl, thank you, Cheryl.
It's a SharePointy type question really, so yes, it's anyone who's got edit rights usually can do a straight rollback. So again, if you're worried about a particular guest you've got on there, you can just knock them back to read access and they won't be able to do that. It doesn't do away with the later version, it just basically says if you're going back a version, I'm going to pretend this is your new version. So you are rolling back, but it goes up a number, if that makes sense.
It does. You can always go roll back again to the document you roll back from, can't you? So yeah. Every version is kept in there, but there's only ever one link to that document. There's only ever one document in the eyes of the user, but in the information settings, you can go in and see all those documents changes and actually compare the changes. So it gives a great deal of control. Nobody can actually wipe out what they've done because every record is kept there.
Yeah, so sorry to interrupt, it's 500 versions by default. I think you can change that if you want. You can also have major and minor versions, quite useful if you're doing training. So if you had a bunch of guests, you could say, well, if we've got major and minor versions on, anyone who's only got read access can only see the major versions. We're still collaborating and changing the minor versions, so you have an awful lot of control over versions. And I cannot tell you the number of times it's bailed people out of trouble where they've accidentally overwritten a whole paragraph and regretted it.
Absolutely. And major and minor versions is one of my favourite elements that can be used with SharePoint publishing for an external site. So you may have your policy, say the HR team are working on a HR policy for annual leave. They make the SharePoint that's visible to everybody to access in the organisation just visible to the major versions. And the head of HR would make a major version, and that become the new one that everybody's accessing. But you might be on version 8.25 in the background whilst you're refining the new policy. So it's got a huge amount of potential to stop you having to update documents as well. So Deb's asking, could you confirm how the use of SharePoint files has a cost benefit in terms of licensing? I assume that you would still have to have an MS Visio, for example, license to contribute to an MS Diagram. Gemma, are you probably starting point on that one?
Yes, I can do. Yeah. So yeah, whatever document you would need access to, so something that is licensed separately, you still need that license. But other than that, if it's within the, your standard documentation, your Word documents, your PowerPoints, your Excels, etc., anyone can access that, and there's no issues with it. But yeah, something like Visio, because it's licensed separately, it's quite a specialist function, isn't it? You would need to have the license for that.
Yeah, but again, there's lots of tools that others you will use, like Whiteboard, where they could be collaborating quite effectively, but not needing that. There is a question that looks quite technical. It's about joiners, leavers and movers policies for both the partner organisations or the forces. But the reality is you're being assured, aren't you, about the force or the organisation you're connecting to in terms of their policy, rather than having to manage the policy within a partner organisation. Cheryl, perhaps are you able to answer a little bit more about that?
It's not a process I work with, unfortunately. So yeah, it's probably something we'd have to take up with something like our sysadmin. I think lots of this is probably under review because there's been an ongoing Information Commissioner's audit going across all forces. So it's probably something everyone's going to have to come to, and it might just be as straightforward as, if the other force isn't going to tell you when that person leaves, you will make an assumption and say after a month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever, they basically get kicked off your system automatically.
And of course, the moment they no longer have access to the force system, they no longer have access to your force system either, because the access is granted through that. Jane, did you want to come in on that one?
And just saying there, the process for the stale accounts would pick up on any that weren't notified to you.
And if you have got questions like that, on the screen now is a barcode, a QR code. The middle one there is the contact us for PDS. If you scan that, or go to the PDS website and get in touch. If you want to get into more detail on that, please get in touch with us. Unfortunately, I've not got your name on the questions on that, but we'll come back to that. So going back to the conversation around this, we haven't got any more questions in the chat right now. Oh, there's one just popped in. It's Deb asking, is there any simple guidance for some of the features such as major and minor versions? They're all on the learning sites, aren't they, and etc. So we're happily signposting them to you, where we can do some things on that as well. And if you visit the Enabling Centre, there's quite a lot of content on there about the different versioning control. But Catherine, I'm going to come to the last question with yourself. It's about the confidence and impact of colleagues using these tools. What sort of thing have you experienced in terms of your colleagues? Because your camera's now working, so I can pop you live.
Yeah, apologies about that. I think it can only be seen as a true benefit, really, especially to us as a force joining an existing collaboration. There was a lot of documentation already created and there for other powers to have access to and to share, rather than, as people have mentioned, trying to email that across, which would have been timely issues with final versions and so on. We could see that through sharing via Teams. In a similar way, we've got a project plan that we share with the West Coast programme team. A big plan that would never go across an email, and for us to drive it up to Bromborough would take quite a lot of time. So being able to share that and have a very quick conversation at the point of that being dropped onto that shared Teams channel is invaluable to us, given where we're at today. I think it's also the benefit of the channels within the teams as well, because we've got a number of different work streams. We've created separate channels up within our Dyfed Powys on instance of Teams, but as well with West Coast. So it just gives that ability to hold those sort of informal working groups in a virtual format then, but as well the sharing of the documentation, and it's the confidence, because people know what they're looking at is always the final version. It's the version that they need to be updating or they need to be referring to as well.
That's fantastic. So there's a couple of guides that we've got on screen now with a couple of QR codes. So the one on the left there is a basic guide to using Teams, and the one on the right hand side is the one around the federation or external access. What I really do recommend is that you do take those links and then you can share them. You see there's a share button in each guide. Click that share, you can take the link and embed that to share it across Teams to your wider team as well. So we have laid out all the simple guides on how to use it, how to access it, and make sure you're getting the absolute most out of this. And I'd really like to thank all four of you for joining us today. Now, we are hopefully going to meet most of you in person in a couple of weeks' time with our event at GMP. I've got Rachel, who's organising that from our team. Rachel, could you give us an idea of what we're going to be covering in GMP's event?
Yeah, thank you, Dave. So many of you may know, some of you may not, but October the 20th, PDS, along with colleagues from Microsoft and our host force, GMP, will be running an event that is looking at the Power Platform. So we were looking at lots of different functionality across there, so whether that's Power BI, Power Automate, or Power Apps. But as the day moves on, the focus will predominantly become around Power Apps. And we really want to encourage forces working together to look at some of the issues that maybe they're facing in forces, some of the areas where they would like to see fixes, and maybe a Power App solution would work. But aside from the workshops, we do have several discussions that will happen throughout the day. We will be looking at some of the conversations that are going on in Force now around Dataverse versus SharePoint. So we will get people up onto the stage, hopefully some familiar faces. So we'll have Tom Connor from PDS, Steve Murphy from the Met, and Alex Metcalf, GMP. They're going to talk us through around some of that conversation. We will have other representatives from PDS who will talk to you about the digital garage and how you can use that to try and work through problems with a series of professionals and other forces alongside you to support that. Like I say, the workshops, I think, will predominantly take up a lot of your time. Two of those running, one of them about what's going on in your force, what Power Apps should we be thinking to come out of that, and then the second one, how are we going to ensure that we work more collaboratively together? So what are the stepping stones we're going to in place to ensure that we have a process in place so we know how to engage and work collaboratively. Alongside that, we are encouraging forces to invite technical colleagues along, because in a second room we will have a series of events running through there that support some of the things that might be on their agendas at the minute. So whether that's looking at centres of excellence, why we need to kind of keep designs refreshed and follow blueprints, things like that. So what I'd really like to say is that I think this is an event for everybody, and I would really encourage you to get those registration forms in if you haven't already. I know we're starting to see quite a few coming in now. If you're on this call and you're not cited on this agenda or the registration forms or anything like that, please watch out on the Force Collaboration team site over the coming days and weeks. We will start to push more and more information out on there, and then more importantly, who that contact is in your force that is cited on this, and we'll be able to get you signed up and attending that event. Apart from that, I would just like to say I'd like to see as many of you there as possible in October, and thank you, Dave. Back to you.
Thanks. Yeah, and we have reached out to a head of senior person in the change or the IT team to nominate, because we do want to make sure at least 3 people from every force have a place. So that's why we're asking for nominations rather than everybody who wants to attend. And we will post details in the Force Collaboration channel so you can get that. But do reach out to the people in your force and we'll be able to get you there. So thanks for returning to our webinars today. It's great to have had you along with us on our first webinar. We weren't too rusty, hopefully, in terms of delivering them. We have got a fast agenda full of webinars, workshops coming up, and you can see the events that are coming up in the next few weeks on screen now. We have refreshed the PDS website. There's a new events page there, and of course the recordings. We do know our audience is a little bit lighter today than normal because of all the work that's going on in relation to the ongoing issues today. So those webinars will be available online for you to access. The new events are all online, ready to access, so just pop along to the PDS website where you can replay all the webinars, or on YouTube, and there's all the events as well that we want you to do. And please remember to share them wider with your team. You know, the webinars are made so that you can click the button and share it with a link into your team if there's things you want others to do. Of course, get in touch with us. We always want to feature your stories about what you're achieving through digital, helping to deliver the digital strategy. So the code is there. Visit the website and do get involved. So thanks again to Cheryl, Jane, Gemma and Catherine, and Rachel, of course, for joining us. Mike in the background doing the questions as normal. And hopefully see you next week when we're going to be talking about phishing and malware and how clicking one simple button on Outlook can trigger a whole mountain of work in the background to keep our security estate secure. Thanks for joining us. See you soon.